6:38 morning to you. This is Breakfast with Stephen and Anne. And as always, you've been getting in touch, which is what we like.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Tony in North Lincolnshire says, by encouraging people on benefits to buy their own homes, the government is encouraging them to buy homes they can't afford to maintain. More affordable social housing is the answer.
And yet, as Jeremy was saying, people do want their own house.
It's a very Tory thing to do, isn't it, to give people the chance to buy their own house?
Richard's got an interesting take. Says those on benefits and working, because you obviously get a lot of benefits if you're still working but on a lower income. If they get a mortgage, you could take them off benefits, as their mortgage could be half of what they're paying in rent, and therefore don't need the extra help from the government as they got when they're renting.
Well, David, though, says, so, have I got this right? The government's new idea is to use my taxes to pay for someone else's mortgage. That can't be right. So presumably they can then sell the house and make a huge profit. Can someone pay my mortgage, please?
Interesting.
Everybody's got a different view on this.
Yeah, I mean, and I totally get where David's coming from on that one. I do. But there's got to be some sense in it somewhere.
Just need more houses, and they need to be more affordable. The ones that are being built, to my mind at the moment, you see them going up all over the place, don't you? The ones that are being built are incredibly expensive. Lovely, but very, very expensive and small.
I guess it depends where you live. I mean, some of the ones are, there's still, you can still get you can get a decent doer-upper in the northwest. I mean, sometimes for like 40 grand.
Yeah, but is there the infrastructure around it? Is there a job anywhere nearby? Yeah, that's the only way to do it, I suppose, is you have to provide employers, you have to provide employment, and then all the infrastructure, and then the housing, and then it will work. But that requires, as we were saying, joined-up thinking, which government just don't seem to be very good at joined-up thinking.
Well, nobody does these days, do they? You need a woman in charge for joined-up thinking. That's my thought. I think,
that's an interesting one.
Do you know what? It almost sounds like a joke, but I'm being deadly serious. When it comes to planning, it's sort of like the multitasking and connecting lots of ideas together. I generally think women are better at it than men.
Or do you need a cross-party committee?
I think that'd be too many cooks.
It would, wouldn't it? Anything that says the word committee sort of tends to be very long and drawn out and very expensive. What's the solution?
Yeah, don't know. Maybe you know. GBNEWS at GBNEWS.uk, please.
Shall we take a look at...
pass it on to number 10.
Yeah, they'd love that. Shall we take a look at the front pages today? The Mirror. Sentenced to death by Putin. The Mirror reports on the tragic case of those two Brits facing a firing squad at the hands of what we're calling a sham trial in Russia.
The Express reports on the right to buy story, saying millions will be given the chance to own their own home. Boris Johnson vowed to complete Margaret Thatcher's unfinished housing revolution.
Low-paid health and care workers are calling in sick because they can't afford the fuel to get to work. That's according to the Guardian front page.
Train drivers have voted to join the biggest rail strikes in a generation. That's in the Times. Unions considering working together to maximise disruption.
Oh,
joy.
Dear. We are now snoozing at 35,000 feet, says the Daily Star. The paper reports the boss of Wizz Air urging pilots not to use fatigue as an excuse not to work. The paper asks if anyone else sees the flaw in his cunning plan.
Yes. Let's go through the papers then in a bit more detail with author and academic Joanna Williams and broadcaster extraordinaire David Hamilton. Morning to you both.
Morning, morning.
Good morning. Joanna, let's kick off with this serious story in the Mirror, looking at these two Brits who've been sentenced to death.
This is a horrific story, is leading lots of the front pages this morning, and rightly so. It's the news that Sean Pinner and Aidan Aslin, two British people who'd gone over to Ukraine and been fighting for Ukraine against Russia, have been captured. We know that was a couple of weeks ago, but now they're being put up, as you rightly described it, I think it was in the Mirror though, as a sham trial. They're being accused of terrorism, of being paid mercenaries. Actually, I think that's untrue, because if you look into the background of these two people, they both have quite strong connections to Ukraine. One of them has a Ukrainian wife. They've lived in Ukraine for lengthy periods of time. It's not like they've just gone over there as these kind of hired thugs just because they have this bloodlust and enjoy killing. You know, they've got clear reasons and connections with Ukraine. You know, they've joined the fight alongside Ukrainian brothers in arms to try and help Ukraine. It's just awful. I mean, how terrifying the prospect of facing a firing squad.
This is a political move, though, isn't it? Because, I mean, ordinarily, it would not have been expected for these two, if you this sham court, just to be executed on the spot. And the fact that that hasn't happened seems to indicate that the authorities there are using it as some sort of bargaining chip.
I mean, that's the worry, and what's been talked about really in many of the papers is the extent to which this might end up leading to more British involvement or more Western involvement generally in the situation in Ukraine. And obviously that's something we've held off from doing so far. We've sent over lots of weapons, but we've not sent over NATO troops, or British troops have not been...
No, but we British have been very high profile in our support, probably the highest profile country in our support of Ukraine, and these two are Brits.
And it does make...
And Russia's making a meal of that, aren't they?
I think this could dissuade more British people from being involved, but incidentally what he's doing breaks the Geneva Convention, so it's absolutely despicable. Yeah. You know, there are no words for it.
They're not guilty of war crimes at all, just of fighting for Ukraine.
Absolutely.
They are technically members of the Ukrainian army, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're not just... They're not...
And they were there before the war began. They've been there for quite a long time. As Joanna says, one of them planning to marry a local girl as well. I mean, it's just, what depths will this man plumb?
No.
It's just... despicable. There's no other.
But I do think you're absolutely right that this is nakedly political, and this is about Putin using whatever leverage he's got to try and get one over, essentially.
And what can our government do other than say we will not negotiate on this? We cannot. They are not guilty of anything.
No, it's very difficult because clearly nobody wants to see these two men killed, executed in this way, but the prospect of just sitting back and watching this unfold is also horrifying. But you're absolutely right, where it leads to, other than this horrible escalation, it's very, very difficult to see how this could play out.
Let's come right back to home, and we've been talking about it already this morning, fuel poverty.
Yes.
The fact that carers can't actually afford to put petrol in their cars to go and do their job.
That's right. That's the story on the front page of The Guardian this morning. And I don't know what petrol is like in your neck of the woods, but in mine, it's fast approaching, I think, £2. And of course, diesel, even more. So...
Is it really?
Yes, nearly 2, and I think it will get. I mean, where's it going to end? You know, what is it going to get to? And as you say, health workers, health visitors, care workers, social workers, all struggling to get to work. I mean, nobody would take the car out now for a day trip to the seaside, would they? No. That's all out of the window now because people are even struggling to get to work. And then there's going to be a train strike. I mean, you know, and we can't get out of the country because the planes aren't flying.
But this is why I don't understand why the government isn't taking more action on things like fuel duty, which is provide immediate, because then people will be tempted to go out to the seaside and spend money and all that sort of thing.
Well,
the economy.
Fuel duty, by the way, if you put £100 worth of petrol in your tank, which you can, more than that, but if you put 100, and the fuel duty is over £29. So, you know, they could cut that, couldn't they? I mean, come on.
Plus VAT on top of that.
Yeah,
absolutely. Exactly. I mean, every time petrol goes up, the Rishi Sunak, the Exchequer, are taking in substantially more money from the VAT and from these levies. And I think it's immoral. I think there comes a point where when you've got carers not able to afford to get to work, I think it becomes a real moral issue where you have to cut the...
Yeah, the problem too is that when the price of petrol goes up, everything goes up because everything is delivered by road. So all prices go up, you know, the price of petrol going up is the very worst thing that can happen.
And if trades unions are beginning to join together and we're going to face a summer of discontent, let alone a winter of discontent, because there are going to be strikes all over the place, we're not going to be able to get anywhere or get anything.
No, that's right.
All you can do is laugh.
Can't even leave the country. Yeah, exactly.
John, let's have a look at the Express and this right to buy scheme that we've been talking about, which is, you know, potentially good news for a lot of people. However, we are light on detail.
No, absolutely, and I think it's that detail which is really at the heart of this, you know, how this is going to play out. I get the aspiration to want to own your own home, and I think that's a positive aspiration, and I think it's something which Boris Johnson is really tapping into, something there that people do want this, but I'm just not convinced that this is the solution at all for so many reasons. I mean, for one thing, what I'm struggling to understand is most mortgage lenders would expect you to have a reasonable deposit in order to be able to get a house, whereas my understanding of the benefit system is that if you're sitting on thousands of pounds in the bank, then you're not going to be able to get benefits. You wouldn't qualify for benefits in the first place. So those two things just seem to cancel each other out.
Well, they also want you to have a job to get mortgage, and obviously
if you're on universal credit, the likelihood is you haven't got a job.
No, absolutely. I mean, there seems to me two fundamental problems here. One, you've been talking about throughout the course of this morning, that there are just not enough houses. I mean, that's the bottom line. You can't solve a housing crisis by tinkering around with little schemes in this way. You have to build more houses. That's the only thing that's going to bring the price of property down, actually building more houses. And the other thing then is why are wages so low that people in work need benefits to top up their wages? If you're working hard, if you're going out there, you're putting in the hours, you should be able to earn enough money to feed your family, you know, to have a life, sustain yourselves without the need for benefits to top that up.
David, can I say, you're looking perky this morning.
Am I?
Which is a relief, because you are at work.
I'm quite surprised you had me back after the last time I was on.
You were naughty last time. But look, what are we meant to do if we have fatigue at work, according to the Daily Star?
Well, this is extraordinary, isn't it? This is the front page of the Daily Star, and it's the boss of Wizz Air who has urged pilots not to use fatigue as an excuse to work. So that means we can have fatigued pilots? Is that okay? I mean, surely fatigue is the very worst thing that could affect pilots, isn't it? Is there a better excuse that a pilot could have than I'm tired?
I suppose they just pop it on autopilot when they're up there, do they?
No, but they have a co-pilot. It's funny because while you were away, I was interviewing somebody about how to take power naps.
Yeah.
And power naps can be just 30 seconds, or a few minutes. And she said even aircraft pilots should do it. As long as they've got a co-pilot, they should actually just go for 15 minutes or so into a power nap state.
What we used to call 40 winks.
That's right, 40 winks, Sitting in your chair, you do it sitting in your chair, so you don't completely conk
40
out.
winks, yeah.
But as long as you've got a co-pilot.
I usually have that in the middle of my show.
What, you put on a long record?
Or maybe it's the listeners who have it, I'm not sure.
I'll tell you what, you wouldn't. If they left the comms on, you heard them snoring away when...
That would be very worrying, wouldn't it?
It'd be a bit worrying, wouldn't it, really? But anyway, don't worry about it too much, because hardly any planes are flying, so, you know, it doesn't really
honestly,
matter.
it just feels like, you know, recession talk almost, doesn't it?
No, absolutely. I mean, anybody would think that turning the global economy off for 2 years would mean you could just hit start and everything would get going again. I mean, sadly, I think a lot of these things were predictable when you try and cut off global supply.
And maybe therefore unavoidable?
I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to try and get some nice, light, bright, funny, happy stories when we come back a little bit later. Otherwise, all our viewers and listeners are going to be...
so depressed.
But yes, very depressed. But, you know, we have to tell it like it is. But we will try and come back with something a bit more cheerful for you.
Yeah, Johnny, I think that we need to work on that, absolutely.
Yeah, Joanna, David, thank you. Work harder.